Beyond Sunday, the podcast where we're helping you take your faith from Sunday morning and into your everyday life. This podcast is coming from TNLC, where we take our Sunday message and we take it a little bit deeper into your life. I am joined by anybody who's listening to the audio only. I'm sorry, you're going to have to pause this, so just go ahead and go to YouTube to watch the interpretive dance that's happening next to me at this table by my co-host, Clayton Bell. Good morning, Pastor Clayton. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I was just getting into the right mental headspace to be able to fully articulate. Sorry, that was...
You're fully articulate. You're not articulating anything, though.
Well, articulation was with not just hands, but with spirit and soul and... Sorry, my voice is still not recovered from the weekend, so I'm just doing the NPR voice.
Yesterday afternoon, you had said you were getting ready to go coach, and you're like, I haven't lost my voice. And I was like, this is going to be a fun podcast with you, no voice, the next day. So, fun times.
Yet I always figure out a way.
Always do. So we wrapped up our Smartest Person in the Room series this past Sunday, and we are jumping. This was week 5. I always count, This was week 5 as we wrapped this series up, and today we're going to. I want to be able to sum up this last Sunday sermon and be able to just anything else from the series as a whole, because we'll be starting, of course, a new series this upcoming Sunday. So, did you want to do the recap? We kind of did a very loose.
Well, here's something I want to recap first, because I don't know if we're doing it clear enough or not.
Okay.
That if people want to interact with us, they can do so online. Oh, yeah. They can email us at podcast@Trinity New Life Church, or they could send in questions and stuff to @Trinity New Life. Because here's my question. I feel like we say that every week, and every Monday we put up a call for questions.
Yep.
And you guys should just stop sending in questions. Here's what I'm going to assume is not the case. I'm going to assume that I am not so good at preaching that you have no questions after the message. So as a reminder, we love to figure out what you guys are asking questions for. Even if you're like, hey, let's say hypothetically I'm leading a discipleship group that's sermon application based and was thinking about how to be able to bring this up. What would you say in that scenario?
How would you want to bring this up in your group?
Right. So again, Trinity New Life for Instagram. It's Trinity New Life for Instagram.
Sorry,
I thought you were... It's not Trinity New Life at. It's Trinity New Life for our Instagram and podcast at podcast @Trinity New Life. Maybe that's why.
I was preemptively correcting you. I knew you were going to do the email wrong. I was just preemptively there.
So, but we didn't talk about it. I can do a real quick sermon recap if you'd like.
It's totally up to you. This is what happens when we don't
I thought, yeah. Well, anyways, we'll go back and forth, but the last message was about this fifth emphasis that you find in the book of Proverbs, which was both the opposite. You find both the emphasis to be hardworking and the admonishment to not be lazy. And so we looked at the benefits of that, and what I was trying to not do was just to. There's a couple times where it talks about mere talk leads to poverty or dreams or desires, and I was like, I don't want to crush dreams or desires, but you can't cash dreams. You can't extend credit on hope. You actually have to go out and you have to do the work. And so that was the encouragement there was, I'm not telling you not to have dreams. I'm not telling you not to do this, but you got to get out there and you got to work hard. And the people who are consistently complaining about the lack of opportunity, but they're complaining about a lack of a certain level of opportunity. Most of the time in today's day and age, you can just go and build up something and create something, but that's not always the way that people want to be able to go. A lot of times we want to be able to have our talents recognized, and we have to make sure we put the hard work in. But the back half of it was we made this turn towards there's a difference because the Proverbs 24:30 through 33 scripture of a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will pounce on you like a bandit, scarcity like an armed man. That idea was a broader picture was being given of a man who had a vineyard but let it be overrun. So here was a man who had opportunity, and if he had put in work, he would have gotten a result from it. And then we talked about how that's not the case for everybody. That another kind of emphasis in Proverbs, and I think it ties in together with hard work. That's why I put it in there. Is it would be foolish if we said hard work alone is what's needed, because we also have to balance the fullness of the emphasis in Scripture and see how many times Solomon, and again, let alone how much in the Torah that Moses speaks about the idea that not that everybody needs an equality of opportunity. We're not pushing for equality of outcome, but we're pushing for equality of opportunity. Not everybody is given that. And so I believe the reason that Proverbs talks disproportionately about the poor is to try to get them onto an even playing field so that they can, again, be treated equally. And so we made the emphasis that, one, we have to recognize that systemic injustice actually does exist. Mm-hmm. It can be doing so along gender lines, ethnic lines, economic lines, generational, age lines. We should do everything we can to work hard. We need to make sure that if opportunities haven't been given to us, that it's clear to recognize that, because there's certainly no lack of hard work on our part. And then finally, when we're in a position of power, when we're in a position of feeling the results and the fruit of our hard work, is there ways for us to be able to level the playing field? So that was my quick summary. If there's, if you're going to ask me the question, what did I leave out, or how do I want to pontificate on this? There's a lot. So there we
go. So just jump there, or just go ahead.
No. You can whatever you want to do.
No, I think that there was the way you even said, like, you didn't want to crush dreams. You didn't want to crush some of this at the onset of the message, but you also didn't want it to just be talk. Like, and that was the another thing that we read a lot in this Proverbs, is that how our talk cannot match what we're doing. And you saw that a little bit here in the idea of hard work. But I loved the way that at the end of the message, especially after we were talking about evening that playing field with the poor, that we actually talked about practicality a little bit in the idea of how can we then recognize. And you went through some of these things of just, which it's not that we don't do that in every message. There's always a next step in all of our messages, but sometimes they're not as outward focused and they're more inward, like heart change, right, kind of thing. Like, but this had a very it was great for those of us in discipleship groups this upcoming week, for those of us who are having these conversations, to be able to be like, okay, but what's your next step? Like, what is there? There is an actual step out into some of these things. And for me, it was the verse in Proverbs 3:27 where it said, "Do not withhold good from those who deserve it when it's in your power to help them. If you can help your neighbor now, don't say come back tomorrow and then I'll help you."
Yeah.
Because it was this idea of, when you were talking about even in those playing fields, and you're talking about all of these things, how easy it is for us to be very comfortable and very easy where we're at and be like, oh, I can get to that later, because there's always, in our heads, there's always a later. Oh, of course I can do this tomorrow. Of course I can do this. But not understanding that that's not the case for everybody in every situation. Some things are much more eminent for them than they are for us, and to be able to have just even that adjustment, like, don't put off what you can do right now. And it's funny because that's kind of one of those, like, leadership hacks that I always tell people, or we're talking like, if I can do something in 5 minutes or less, I'm going to do it right now. I'm just going to get it done, so I don't have to do it later. I don't have to versus something that's going to take me something where I need to sit down and plan and think through things. I'm like, just get it done now. And so this verse, I was like, oh, well, if the greatest leader of all time can talk about these things in Scripture, maybe this is something that is key here. So that's just really, like, from the fullness of the message, that was some of the parts that really stood out to me. But what were some of the aspects of this message that you were, one, looking forward to most touching on, or like you were excited to be able to bring some new perspective to?
I think the emphasis to work hard is that either resonates or makes people roll their eyes. And so I was trying to, the people who it resonates with, I was trying to, again, encourage and remind them. And the people that tend to roll their eyes, I think they diverge into two camps. The one camp is that they want things handed to them, and they just believe that because of their faith and because of their dreams and because of their talent, that it's just going to be handed to them. And what I didn't want to do was to say, stop it with your dreams, stop it with your ideas, stop it with your entrepreneurial focus. No, there's nothing wrong with that. But you have to put that into practice. Yeah. You have to actually go and make a plan, and you have to go, well, when are you going to do that? And why aren't you doing it right now? And what's holding you back from that? And is anything actually are you the thing that's holding you back from that? I think that we should dream God dreams. I don't think we have to just wake up, punch the clock, go to work every day, and then not think about and not ask the question, am I in the will of God? Am I doing the things that He's called me to? If you want to, John Acuff is an author and speaker. I'm sure he's a podcaster. Everybody's a podcaster these days. Do you have to be paid for a podcast to call yourself a podcaster?
No,
do you just
because
have
I
to?
put it in my bio. So,
Okay. I say I host the podcast. I don't know.
Yeah, you need to change your bio too. But
That's true.
That's
my
off,
Instagram bio.
Yeah, that's an offline conversation. Anyways, go on.
It's clearly
You
online
cannot
now.
you cannot be paid. Oh, yes. I don't think you have to be paid to be a podcaster.
Right. You don't have to be. But
so everyone is.
John Acuff has a great book on this called Quitter, and he talks a lot about how to be able to get that second dream, the thing that you really want to be able to get to be your life and your focus. How do you get that in there? And you just don't find people who are like, you just take it casually. You find these people who are like, you have to work two jobs, because you have to work your regular job and then you have to work your dream job.
Right.
Until at such a time that your dream job can overtake your actual quote unquote real job or your day job. And so I think that I don't want to tamp those down. I want to be able to pull those up, but I want there to be this path of like, you have to work really, really, really hard. When people talk about, whenever we tell the story of getting into the church building that we're in, that was 45 days of 16 to 20 hour days.
Yeah.
For me, I would work 8 hours here. I'd go home. I'd eat a meal. I had so much Jersey Mike's during that time that they knew me by name for lunch, and I can't even go back there. It's like I've had it too much. Like
I've hit the limits.
I hit the limit. Like there's nothing wrong with Jersey Mike's. It's a fine establishment, but it passed a point with me. And but I knew that was a season. I knew that wasn't how I was going to live my life. And so recognizing, people might look at the effort that's needed to start something or to be able to work, quote unquote, two jobs at the same time and go, I can't sustain that over the long term. Nobody's asking you to sustain it for the long term, but you better find a way to be able to sustain it for the short term. And either you bust out and you bust past it so that dream job can become real job, or you realize dream job can't become real job. I tried. Sometimes you need to take those jobs and you need to work hard. You do everything so that when you look back and it didn't go the way that you wanted it to, you can say, it's not because I didn't try. It's not because I didn't give effort. It's not because I didn't fire every bullet that was in my gun. I gave everything that I had. And so that's one reason why some people might roll their eyes. But the other reason is because people would say, it doesn't matter how hard I work, the deck is stacked against me. Now, there are a lot, and again, the emphasis of the back half of the message was to say, that's not just whining and complaining from everybody. Of course it's whining and complaining from some people. Of course it is, because people are lazy. That's just why there's all these admonishments to be lazy. But there also is this overwhelming emphasis in these passages of we need to treat people with equal scales. I just remember, and this, I think this always falls along. It's hard to have this discussion without thinking about politics, without thinking about, I don't even know if Republican and Democrat are the right terms these days, as much as it is like conservatives and progressives or liberal. Like it almost feels like these party titles don't accurately represent, in my head, what I think of as the parties from when I was formatively getting into politics late in high school through kind of my early to mid 20s. And so I don't know that, but I think that more and more, especially with some of the Democrats who have come to prominence, that there becomes a little bit more of this idea of the equality of outcome. And again, I know I'm speaking in stereotypes. I know I couldn't articulate, the platforms of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden completely and totally accurately and understand the balance in those. But I know that there's been a greater push towards those ideas. There's almost this open socialism where people are going, what's wrong with that? And there has been a biblical, this idea that there's a biblical reason for that, or there's a biblical push for that. We look at Acts chapter 2, we look at Acts chapter 4. And instead what we see there is that's the outcome of what happens in somebody's heart. However, just because that's not the programmed outcome doesn't mean that there aren't lessons that we can learn. And that's the equality of opportunity. That's what it seems that the scriptures push for over and over again, is that everybody gets an equal opportunity, which not everybody in our society does because of the sinfulness of man.
Right.
And again, the other emphasis was a more traditional Republican conservative approach is just work hard. That's all you need to do. But most of the people who do that didn't come from any kind of history of slavery or immigration. That's usually white folks who were given a legitimate opportunity to be able to do that. This is, you could read Hillbilly Elegy and look at how it's not always about, we always try to divide that along sometimes racial lines or different things, but you can actually, sorry. This is all the things firing in my brain at the same time, that we're actually far more divided along economic lines, I believe, in America than racial lines, except for the foolishness of, not the foolishness, but the thing that most white people don't realize is that they actually don't have the opportunities that they think that they are afforded. They just have a different mindset about it than a traditional African American, I think, mindset in some folks. And so it's just something we have to be aware of. It's something we have to think through and kind of work through with people, that no, just because you're wanting to work hard doesn't mean you're always going to get there. Now, there's also a difference in, I worked really hard and I didn't get to become the president of Apple. I worked really hard and I just didn't get to be a head coach in the NFL.
Right.
You may not always achieve all of those levels of dreams, but you could still have great dreams. But if you end up in a position where, hey, if I work hard, I can have the means to be able to provide food, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If I can provide those for my family, that's actually a really great opportunity. And some people, and I know we could get into a discussion of minimum wage and how high it should be, but then again, you get into the purpose of what is the purpose of minimum wage and blah, 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 blah. I read things other than the Bible, and we think, but that's all of that stuff is what is behind and underlying this message.
Yes.
And we have to recognize there are systemic things, either baked into the heart and mind of man or baked into the heart and mind of systems. I mean, you can go look at mandatory minimums. You could look at the difference between prison sentences for cocaine and crack in the 80s and 90s. I don't know what they are. You can look at the, an entire generation of African Americans are incarcerated for marijuana. I'm not trying to speak to or for its legalization, but you can also compare that to the college, kid named Bo, who gets, caught with a dime bag, and how the system tends to treat people from different backgrounds or people who can or cannot afford to get lawyers. And one of the things that I talked about the article, how the IRS had said, hey, we actually do audit poor people more. What I wanted to get into, and one of the biggest ways that you see this kind of systemic cycle of keeping people down, even if it's not trying to do that, is with parking tickets and parking violations. There are so many people who get caught in a cycle where they can't pay their parking ticket, they can't pay their parking fine, so their license gets suspended. Because their license gets suspended, they can't go to work because they are not always in an area that has great public transit, and they can do that. Because they can't go to work, the fines then begin to pile up. And there's a lot of legislation coming now of people trying to give massive amnesty on parking tickets and parking violations, so that people can actually get back to work and not fall into these cycles and payment plans and da-da-da. I don't know. Serial Season 3, I think, was a great, I think that's a great podcast series that talks about the systemic ways that it's not always the heart and mind of an individual, but when the heart and mind of an individual who might be sinful and broken is placed into a system that's perhaps sinful and broken and not aware of its own flaws, how it creates or perpetuates that injustice rather than trying to get people to have equal opportunities. And we can go into boundary stones and all that stuff, but that was a lot of me talking.
So you have thoughts on all of this, huh? You've got a few things you pondered over the little bit of time. And
well, I will say this: if you had talked to me, if you had talked to me 20 years ago, I would have been the person who said all you have to do is hard work.
Right.
And nope, just work hard. That's all you need. And it has been, so my journey has not been to say everybody's unjust and then I have to learn how to work hard. My journey has been learning how to understand what other people's experiences are, because I think that hard work can solve any problem.
Right.
And that's just not the case.
It's amazing. It's amazing how when you open your eyes a little bit, that you start to see these things. Because I think that everybody at some point in time in their life, they feel as though they are the victim of some form of injustice. That can be, it's not fair that my mom took away my phone, to to actual
the
social,
great injustice
the greatest injustice of parenting. But it's so easy. I mean, I could speak to myself in situations where I'm like, I don't have the upper hand on this. I don't have this here. And it's so easy for me to back into something like that until I stopped and opened my eyes, and I'll talk to somebody across the table from me and be like, yeah, you have it different than I do, don't you? And when you open those conversations and you open those things, and then you suddenly the injustices that some of us have felt are pale in comparison to the injustices of the people that we're sitting next to at Starbucks or in church or across the cubicles from us at work, and you start to actually develop conversations about these types of things, and you start to see, one, it brings all of the things that we feel into perspective. Like, I can't tell you how many times I want to whine about things that I'm like, I shouldn't be whining about this. So-and-so has it so much harder than I do, or this person has this issue or that. Then I'm like, okay, you begin to develop that empathy for these things. But it does make us like you said, 20 years ago, the way I would have looked at a lot of situations, I was 20 years ago, young kid with full dreams, nothing but let's go get them. And then life comes in and brings some proper perspective sometimes. And you're like, oh, this isn't going to be all, cherry drops lemon drops and sunshine. That's okay. Lemon drops and sunshine. It's like and
cherry drops. Do you have a sore throat? What's happening?
I actually do. But no, that whole idea of how, and I think that's why that one verse in Proverbs really stood out to me, was this idea of what can we do right now? Don't put off for tomorrow if you've got an area to help. And sometimes that help looks like nothing more than just listening. And to be able to develop some empathy, to understand the people in the world, to be able to elevate somebody or something in your eyes, into your perspective, into your worldview, into your cataclysm of people. Sometimes that's all you need to do in these situations. But definitely, you look at just the way we see culture and the world working, and I agree with you. I think that there is specifically, even for our demographic, the people that in our immediate circles, economic is obviously the biggest dividing line for us. And you start to look at and on both ends, you can talk about both hard work and how we relate to the poor on both sides of them, and they both have areas where they need to grow, and they need to understand the way God looks at these things. I had a conversation just this morning in my discipleship group, and we were talking about these situations.
I always forget.
I always come from a discipleship group, so I have all these great thoughts because we just had all of these conversations.
Well, I called somebody and I text somebody Sunday night, and was like, "Hey, how did your group go?" Because I was like, I felt good preaching it, but how did that land? And he's like, "Too long. We'll call later." I was like, "Oh my gosh, it went that bad?" He's like, "No, I thought you were talking about something completely different with my discipleship group." I was like, "Oh, okay." He's like, "No, it was a good discussion." I was like, "Oh my God."
I had actually somebody. It was TNLC morning at Starbucks today. We had 2,500 people in there. They were just kept coming in. But somebody was like, I was getting ready to start my group, and somebody came in. They had already had their discipleship. She goes, "Good luck." And she's like, "Because the conversation is just gonna go deep." And I was like, in a good way or bad? She's like, in a great way. It was just a really good and that's what I saw. As we started talking about the way that we were raised and perceived, both hard work and how we relate to the poor, it's amazing to see how they go hand in hand, and how much it is this idea of opportunity, looking at the opportunities in front of us and how everybody related to those differently, and how they work towards them or they don't work towards them, and the expectations that they had or the expectations that they should have had, and all these types of things. And I'm like, wow, this really hit so many different people in so many different ways. And then when I threw out the grenade, you throw the bomb in the middle of the table and walk away of so now can we apply this to any other area other than just financial, economic lines? And they're like, yeah, you start talking about race and gender and da-da-da-da-da-da, and you're like, and now the conversation just went 4 hours longer than we originally intended, because it is, again, this isn't just a fit in the box single type of situations that we're looking at. That I think that's been my favorite. I think that's my favorite thing about this whole Proverbs series, is we've been looking at all of these different characters, how much these characters apply to any age, stage, demographic, all of these things, how we've been able to take things from them and be able to say, whether you're a mom, a dad, a sister, a brother, a son, a daughter, the way our tongue operates, the way we all need to have fear and reverence in order to attain the wisdom that God has for us, the way that like the adulterous woman and having that desire for something that doesn't belong to us or isn't for us, like all of these things down to the hard work and poor, like even though we're saying hard work and poor, it doesn't matter if you are poor or you aren't poor. It doesn't matter if you are a hard worker or not. Like there is something in this book for everybody throughout the entire book of Proverbs.
Yeah, and that's what, again, I know you wonder how deep into a series do you continue to give recaps, but to make sure that every week we talked about, because we are building on a foundation of God is separate and different than us. Mm-hmm. We then begin to build a system of behaviors and morality, which is what everybody is doing.
Right.
Everybody is building a system of behaviors and morality. You're either doing it intentionally or unintentionally. Mm-hmm. You're either choosing the foundation or not choosing the foundation, but it's being chosen for you, okay? So as a Christian, as somebody who claims that, you've got to be so intentional about it. I don't know. I hope I'm always getting better, but I feel like, I was thinking about what did I really enjoy about this series, and it's funny. Revelation, mm-hmm. which I know we're about to preach from the book of Revelation over the next 5 weeks, but I feel like there was so much revelation for me mm-hmm. in this series, and again, we've talked about this on this podcast. We're pushing more into this. The true understanding of the nature of lordship mm-hmm. and where it comes from.
Yeah.
If we think lordship is simply an argument of best practices of behaviors versus behaviors, of morality versus morality, then anything is up for debate. Mm-hmm. But hopefully we will continue to always link discipleship and lordship back to the foundation of Christ. And our lordship has to be intrinsically attached to that foundation. And when you can't leave that foundation, you then cannot let your behaviors and morality take on any mm-hmm. shape. Any shape.
Yeah.
So it's week 3 of our next series. Week 3 of our next series might be an hour-long
somebody
message.
Somebody told me this morning, like, this has been the greatest series. And I'm like, not that this has not been a great series. It is a great series. But I'm really excited about our next series, too. So I'm like, I'm in that tension between, this was a great series. Oh, no, this is a really great series we're getting ready to go into as well. I'm really excited about all of the things. But I think that if anything, if you're listening to the podcast, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're,
smash that like button.
Doing all the things, like, if you could take this entire series beyond Sunday and be able to really put into practice, it is just coming back to that basic idea of mm-hmm. all of these things cannot be obtained unless you have a proper perspective of lordship and you are trying to adjust.
Which is a proper perspective of who God is and who you are.
Right. And be able to reorient your life around that. So through this series, through this particular sermon, through any of the last 4 that we went through, if you're still struggling with those types of things, I just encourage you to, one, open up your Bible and continue to read in Proverbs. Like, we did mm-hmm. not touch every single piece of scripture in Proverbs. And a proverb a day keeps the devil away. Like, that's just like what they say, like start there and really begin to ask God to show you where you need to make those adjustments. I don't think that this is a series that, okay, we're done and now everybody has understood and understands lordship. I think that this is something that we will continue to come back to on the podcast, through our sermons, through all the things, because that's the ministry life that we have mm-hmm. we lead and we want to push people to always. But to really be able to say, okay, God, where do I need to change? What do I need to adjust? How can I, and be willing to make those orientations is going to go so much further in your faith.
Yeah. Who is God?
Yep.
And if he is God, and understanding the nature of not a little g God, but creator, mm-hmm. then that has to be the place, whether we agree with it or not, that behaviors and morality is built upon and has to be congruent with. So, but that was our series on Proverbs called How to Be the Smartest Person in the Room, which, again, one of the things nobody called us on is if everybody's the smartest person in the room, then nobody is really the smartest person in the room.
I waited for that. Yeah. Nobody, not a single one.
But, okay, so we want to thank you guys for joining us. We're going to be back this week with an NLX podcast that's going to be on our other feed at, you can find that at NLX Podcast on Instagram. Mm-hmm. But again, the podcast at Trinity New Life email still works for all of those things. Any questions, any follow-up, you can follow us for this podcast at Trinity New Life on Instagram, as well as podcast at trinitynewlife.com. You can, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you are subscribed.
And you like, comment, share,
all of those things. Is that what you're supposed to say?
I don't know. I'm still working on the YouTube lingo.
I'm just copying and pasting
all the podcasts we ever listen to are like, okay, I like the way they say that. Let's change that in the word. We'll figure it out.
I know the YouTube channel I watch the most is British, so I feel like, all right, well, we got to like that.
That's funny. That's Mike's. Always British people on
the
YouTube.
CrossFit guy?
Apparently, I'm sure it's the CrossFit guy. Apparently, we need to get British accents though for the YouTube videos only. Well, you tried on Sunday.
I did. Yeah. All right. Well,
have a great week, everyone.
Bye, guys.